Towards the end of September 1969, an order came in on a gray morning. Sitting in the communications office at Fort Lewis in Washington, Lieutenant Walter Briggs was listening to the sounds coming from the teletype machine as it typed out the mission briefing. He had spent his entire career in the military, and at 39 years old, was a man who believed in procedures and protocols. He had spent most of his service conducting signal operations in quiet, remote parts of the country where not much happened. This assignment seemed no different. Mission: repair and test the Mount Shasta relay station. Duration: 72 hours. Personnel: 3. Classification: routine. The station had been closed since early spring. It was said to have been damaged by weather conditions. Ice had bent the antenna array, and melting snow had washed out the access road. Command wanted the station operational again before winter set in. It was a simple job: climb the mountain, repair the equipment, run signal tests, and come back down. The station had been offline since early spring. Weather damage. They said ice had bent the antenna array and the access road had washed out during snowmelt. Command wanted it operational again before winter. Simple work: climb the mountain, fix the equipment, run a signal test, and come back down. Briggs folded the paper and tucked it into his jacket. He had done a dozen jobs like this. Mountains, deserts, coastal installations, they all blurred together after a while, but something about the name stuck with him: Mount Shasta. He had heard it before, in passing, from a sergeant who had served in California years earlier. The man had said the locals avoided the upper slopes after dark. He had laughed when he said it like it was a joke. Briggs hadn't asked why. The other 2 men assigned to the mission were already waiting in the motor pool. Sergeant Henry Tate stood beside a green Jeep, checking straps on the equipment packs. He was 43, older than most sergeants, with a lined face and calm hands. He had been a field engineer for 20 years and knew how to fix almost anything. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. The third man was Private Ellis Carter. He was 31, quiet, new to the unit. He had transferred in from a logistics company 3 months earlier and had not said much since. His file was clean, but sparse. No awards, no reprimands, just steady service. He stood a few feet from the Jeep, hands in his pockets, looking at the ground. Briggs had read that Carter kept a journal. Some men did. It helped them think. "Ready?" Briggs asked. Tate nodded. Carter looked up and said, "Yes, sir." They loaded the Jeep with gear, radios, batteries, tools, climbing rope, rations for 5 days, and a weatherproof tent. The drive south would take most of the day. They would reach the base of Mount Shasta by evening and start the climb at first light. The sky was low and gray as they drove out of Fort Lewis. Rain spattered the windshield. Briggs sat in front with Tate driving. Carter sat in the back, his journal open on his lap, writing in small, careful letters. Briggs glanced at him in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Men had their ways of coping with silence. They crossed into California late in the afternoon. The landscape changed from wet forest to open plains, then back to hills covered in pine and fir. The road climbed steadily. The air grew colder. By the time they reached the town of Weed, just south of the mountain, the light was fading. Weed was a small logging town, quiet and still. They stopped at a gas station to refuel. An older man came out to pump the gas. His face weathered and creased. He looked at the Jeep, at the uniforms, and nodded slowly. "Army?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Briggs said. "Going up the mountain?" "Relay station, routine maintenance." The man wiped his hands on a rag and looked toward the north, where the white peak of Mount Shasta rose above the trees. The summit was hidden in cloud. "You boys be careful up there," he said. "We will," Briggs said. The man paused, as if deciding whether to say more. Then he added, Folks around here don't go up past the tree line after dark. Haven't for years." "Why's that?" Tate asked. The man shrugged. "Things go quiet up there. Too quiet. Radio stops working. Compasses spin. People get turned around. Lost a hunter 2 winters back. Found him 3 days later sitting on a rock staring at nothing. He wouldn't talk about it." Briggs nodded politely. "We'll keep our eyes open." The man finished filling the tank and took their money. As they drove away, Carter wrote something in his journal. Briggs didn't ask what. They reached the trailhead just before full dark. The access road ended at a locked gate with a faded Forest Service sign. "Restricted area. Authorized personnel only." Tate got out and cut the chain with bolt cutters. They drove another mile up a rough dirt track until the trees grew too thick. That was where they camped for the night. The air was cold and still. No wind, no birds. The silence felt heavy, like a weight pressing down. Tate built a small fire and they heated rations in tin cans. Carter sat on a log and stared into the flames. Briggs tried the radio, scanning through frequencies. Static hissed back at him, low and constant, like water running over stones. "Signal's weak here," he said. "Always is near the mountain," Tate replied. "Rock interferes. We'll get better reception up top." They ate in silence. The fire crackled. Shadows moved between the trees, but it was only the wind, Briggs told himself. Just the wind. Before turning in, Briggs walked to the edge of the clearing and looked up. The mountain loomed above them, black against the night sky. No stars, no moon, just darkness and the faint outline of the ridge. He felt a strange pressure in his ears, like the air had thickened. He swallowed, but it didn't help. He walked back to the tent and zipped it shut behind him. Carter was already asleep, curled on his side, journal tucked under his pack. Tate lay on his back, eyes open, staring at the tent ceiling. "You feel that?" Tate asked quietly. "Feel what?" Briggs said. "The air. It's pressing down." Briggs listened. The silence outside was complete. No insects, no rustling leaves, nothing. "Altitude," Briggs said. "We're at 7,000 feet. Your body's adjusting." Tate didn't answer. After a moment, he closed his eyes. Briggs lay down and tried to sleep, but the pressure in his ears stayed. It felt like the mountain was holding its breath. They started up at dawn. The sky was pale gray, the color of old steel. The trail was narrow and steep, winding through dense forest. Pine needles covered the ground, muffling their footsteps. The air smelled of resin and cold earth. Briggs led. Tate followed with the equipment pack. Carter walked last, his rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes on the ground. They moved in silence. The only sound was their breathing and the soft crunch of boots on stone. After an hour, the trees began to thin. The slope grew steeper. The air grew colder. Briggs checked his compass. The needle swung left, then right, then settled somewhere between north and northeast. He frowned and tapped the glass. The needle jumped again. "Compass is off," he said. Tate stopped and pulled out his own. Same problem. The needle drifted, unsure.
"Magnetic interference," Tate said. "There's a lot of iron in the rock here." Old volcanic deposits. They continued climbing using the trail markers nailed to trees. Small metal discs painted orange, each one numbered. The markers were old, some rusted through, but they were enough to follow. By mid-morning they reached the tree line. The forest ended abruptly, giving way to oaken slope, covered in loose scree and patches of old snow. The relay station sat another 500 feet higher, perched on a rocky shelf just below the ridge. From this distance, it looked like a small metal box with a crooked antenna tower beside it. The wind picked up as they climbed out of the trees. It was cold and steady, pushing against their backs. Briggs felt his ears pop. The pressure eased slightly, but it didn't go away. It had moved deeper now, into his chest. Carter stopped and bent over, hands on his knees. His face was pale. "You all right?" Briggs asked. Carter nodded. Just need a minute. They rested on a flat rock and drank water from canteens. Briggs scanned the slope above them. The relay station was visible now, its metal walls streaked with rust. The antenna tower leaned at an angle. One support leg buckled. The door hung open, swinging slightly in the wind. Looks worse than the report said, Tate muttered. We'll assess when we get there, Briggs said. They reached the station just after noon. The structure was small, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, built from corrugated steel bolted to a concrete foundation. Inside was a single room with a workbench, a radio transmitter, a battery bank, and a logbook chained to the wall. Everything was covered in dust and bird droppings. The air smelled of rust and mildew. Tate set down his pack and surveyed the equipment. Transmitters intact, battery banks dead, antennas bent, but fixable. We'll need to stabilize the tower first. Briggs walked outside and looked around. The station sat on a narrow shelf of rock, with a steep drop on one side and the ridge rising behind it. The view stretched for miles, forest and valleys below, mountains in the distance. It should have been beautiful, but something about it felt wrong. The silence was too deep. No wind now, no birds, no distant hum of engines or planes. Just stillness. Carter stood near the edge of the shelf, staring down into the valley. Briggs walked over to him. What do you see? Briggs asked. Carter didn't answer right away. Then he said quietly, Nothing. I don't see anything. Briggs looked down. The valley was there, dark green with trees, but it felt distant, like looking at a photograph. Let's get to work, Briggs said. They spent the afternoon repairing the tower. Tate climbed the structure with a wrench and rope, tightening bolts and bending the antenna back into shape. Briggs replaced the batteries and tested the transmitter. Carter strung new wiring from the tower to the station. By late afternoon, the work was done. Briggs powered on the transmitter and tuned to the primary frequency. Static filled the room, loud and crackling. He adjusted the dial, searching for a clear channel. The static changed pitch, rising and falling like waves, but no voices came through. Try the backup frequency, Tate said. Briggs switched dials. More static, this time lower, almost a hum. He keyed the microphone. Fort Lewis, this is Relay 6. Radio check, over. Static answered. He tried again. Fort Lewis, Relay 6. How copy, over. Nothing. Tate frowned. Antennas aligned. Power's good. Should be working. Maybe the transmitter's damaged. Briggs said it tested fine this morning. They ran diagnostics for another hour, checking connections, testing voltages, adjusting frequencies. Everything looked normal, but the radio wouldn't transmit. It only hummed. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, the air grew colder. Shadows stretched across the shelf. The silence deepened. Carter stood in the doorway looking out. It's getting dark, he said. We'll camp here tonight, Briggs said. Try the radio again in the morning. They set up the tent on the flat ground beside the station. Tate started a small fire using wood they had carried up from the tree line. They heated rations and ate without talking. The fire crackled, but the sound felt small, swallowed by the quiet. Briggs checked his watch. 1830 hours. He wrote in the logbook. Day 1, station reached, repairs complete, radio non-functional, cause unknown. Will attempt contact at 600. He closed the book and looked up. The sky was dark now, no stars visible, just low clouds pressing down. The fire threw weak light across the rocks. Beyond the light, the darkness felt absolute. Carter was writing in his journal again, his face lit by the firelight. Briggs saw his hand shaking slightly as he wrote. What are you writing? Briggs asked. Carter looked up, surprised. Just observations, sir. Like what? Carter hesitated. The quiet. It's louder than it should be. Briggs didn't know what to say to that. He nodded and looked away. Tate was staring into the fire, his face unreadable. After a long moment, he said, I've been on a lot of mountains. Never felt one like this. What do you mean? Briggs asked.
Tate didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It's like the mountain listening." They finished eating and put out the fire. The darkness closed in immediately, thick and heavy. Briggs lay in the tent listening. He expected to hear wind or rocks shifting or something, but there was nothing. Just the pressure in his ears, steady and deep, like the mountain was breathing. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but the silence kept him awake. Briggs woke to absolute silence. The hum. He opened his eyes and stared at the tent ceiling. The fabric glowed faintly with pre-dawn light. He could hear his own heartbeat, slow and steady, but nothing else. Not Tate's breathing beside him, not Carter shifting in his sleep, nothing. He sat up. Tate was already awake, sitting cross-legged, staring at the tent wall. Carter lay on his side, eyes open, unmoving. "You hear it?" Tate asked quietly. "Hear what?" Briggs said.
They went back to the station and tried the radio again. Briggs powered it on and tuned through every frequency, military and civilian. Nothing but static. The same low hum filled the speakers, matching the vibration in his chest. He keyed the microphone. "Fort Lewis, this is Relay 6. Emergency contact. Do you copy? Over." Static. "Fort Lewis, Relay 6. We are experiencing equipment failure and possible environmental interference. Request instruction. Over." More static, then a sharp burst of noise that made Briggs flinch. It sounded like a voice, distorted and stretched, but he couldn't make out words. "Say again," Briggs said. The noise faded back to static. Tate leaned over the transmitter, listening. "Play it back." They had recorded the transmission on a small tape deck. Briggs rewound the tape and pressed play. The burst of noise came through again, clearer this time. It wasn't a voice. It was something else. A pattern. 3 short pulses, a pause, then 1 long pulse. Tate frowned. "That's not random." "Morse?" Briggs asked. Tate counted the pulses. 3 short, 1 long. "That's the letter V." They looked at each other. "Could be interference," Briggs said. "Reflected signal." "From where?" Tate asked. Briggs didn't answer. He turned off the radio and closed the logbook. "We finished the job. Test the equipment one more time tonight. If the radio's still down, we hike out at first light." Tate nodded. Carter said nothing. They spent the day checking the antenna array and replacing worn cables. The work went slowly. The hum made it hard to focus. It pressed on their minds like a hand, constant and heavy. By mid-afternoon, Briggs felt exhausted, though he had done little physical work. Carter worked in silence, moving carefully, like someone afraid of making noise. Briggs saw him pause several times, head tilted, listening. "You all right?" Briggs asked. Carter nodded. "Yes, sir. Just trying to figure out where it's coming from." "Don't think about it," Briggs said. "Focus on the work." Carter nodded again, but his hands were shaking. As the sun dropped low, the hum grew stronger. It moved through the ground now, a steady pulse that Briggs could feel in his boots. He knelt and pressed his hand to the rock. The vibration was faint, but real. Tate crouched beside him. "Feel that?" "Yeah, this mountain's active," Tate said. "Volcanic. There's magma down there, miles deep. Maybe it's moving, creating pressure waves." "That would explain the sound," Briggs said. "Maybe," Tate said. He didn't sound convinced. They ate dinner as the light faded. The fire burned low, casting long shadows. The hum filled the air now, undeniable. It drowned out the sound of their breathing, their movements, everything. The silence was gone, replaced by a deep, relentless vibration. Carter sat apart from the fire, journal open on his lap. He wrote slowly, his face drawn and pale. Briggs walked over. "What are you writing?" Carter looked up. His eyes were wide, too wide. "I'm writing what I hear."
What do you hear? Carter's voice was quiet. Words. Briggs felt his chest tighten. What words? Briggs took the journal from him and read the page. The handwriting was cramped and uneven. The same 3 words repeated in columns. Come, stay, listen. Come, stay, listen. Come, stay, listen. Briggs closed the journal and handed it back. That's the hum talking, Carter. It's infrasound. It affects the brain, makes you hear things that aren't there. Yes, sir, Carter said, but he kept writing. That night, none of them slept. The hum was too loud, too deep. It filled the tent like water, pressing against their ears, their lungs. Briggs lay on his back, eyes open, watching the tent fabric ripple in a wind that wasn't there. At 0300 hours, the hum stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Briggs sat up fast, heart pounding. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. His ears rang in the absence of the hum. Beside him, Tate was already awake, sitting rigid, staring at nothing. It stopped, Briggs whispered. Tate nodded slowly. Yeah. Where's Carter? They looked around. Carter's sleeping bag was empty, unzipped. His boots were gone. Briggs grabbed his flashlight and crawled out of the tent. The night was pitch black. No moon, no stars. The beam of his flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the rocks, the station, the antenna tower. No sign of Carter. Tate came out behind him. Carter, he called. No answer. They circled the camp, calling his name. The silence swallowed their voices. Briggs felt the pressure in his chest again, tighter now, like hands squeezing. Then they heard it. A voice, faint and distant, coming from higher up the ridge. Help! Briggs and Tate looked at each other. The voice came again. Help me! It was Carter's voice. They grabbed their rifles and flashlights and started climbing. The slope was steep and unstable, loose scree sliding under their boots. The flashlight beams bounced wildly, throwing shadows that looked like movement. Carter! Briggs shouted. Up here! The voice called back. I can't see! They climbed faster, breath coming hard. The air was thin and cold. The ridge loomed above them, a black wall against the darker sky. They found him 200 feet above the station, standing on a narrow ledge. He was facing the mountain, his back to them, arms at his sides. His flashlight lay on the ground beside him, still on, pointing at the rock. Carter, Briggs said carefully. Turn around. Carter didn't move. Carter, look at me. Slowly Carter turned. His face was blank, his eyes unfocused. He looked through Briggs, not at him. I heard it, Carter said quietly. Heard what? Tate asked. Keep moving, Briggs said. They didn't stop again until they reached the tree line. The moment they stepped into the forest, the pressure eased. The air felt lighter. Birds called from the branches above. The hum faded. Carter stopped and leaned against a tree. He closed his eyes and took a long breath. When he opened them, they looked clearer. I'm sorry, sir, he said. For what? Briggs asked. For what I said up there. I wasn't myself. Don't worry about it. Did you see it? Carter asked. See what? Carter looked back up the trail toward the ridge. The light in the crack. It was blue. Briggs and Tate exchanged a glance. Neither of them had seen any light. There was no light, Carter, Briggs said gently. Carter didn't argue. He just nodded and kept walking. They reached the Jeep by late afternoon and drove back to Weed without speaking. The gas station was closed. The town looked deserted. They didn't stop. On the drive north, Briggs tried to piece it together. The hum, the radio failure, Carter's episode, all of it could be explained. Infrasound, equipment malfunction, altitude sickness. But the pieces didn't fit clean. The pattern was wrong. That night, back at Fort Lewis, Briggs filed his report. He kept it simple. Mission incomplete. Equipment failure. Medical evacuation of 1 personnel due to altitude sickness. Recommend Station B decommissioned. He didn't mention the hum. He didn't mention the crack. He didn't mention Carter's words. The report was stamped routine and filed. But 2 weeks later, a follow-up team was sent to Mount Shasta. They reached the relay station, checked the equipment, and found everything in working order. The radio transmitted perfectly. The antenna was straight, the batteries were full. Their report read, "No anomalies detected. Station operational." Briggs read that report in his quarters and felt his hands go cold. He pulled out Carter's journal, which he had kept. He opened it to the last page. The writing was small and tight, filling every inch. "They're still there, inside the mountain, waiting, listening. They spoke through the hum. They showed me the way in. I almost went, but he pulled me back. They're waiting for someone who won't turn around." Briggs closed the journal. He never went back to Mount Shasta. But sometimes, late at night, when the barracks were quiet and the world was still, he heard it again. The hum, deep and low, coming from nowhere and everywhere, and he knew the mountain was still listening. 3 days after returning to Fort Lewis, Briggs was called to the signals office. A captain he didn't know was waiting, holding a manila folder marked Classified Signal Intelligence. "Lieutenant," the captain said, "we need to discuss your Mount Shasta report." Briggs felt his chest tighten. "Sir, I filed a complete account. Equipment failure, environmental factors." "I'm not questioning your report," the captain interrupted. "I'm here about what you didn't report." He opened the folder and pulled out a reel-to-reel tape. "This was recorded automatically by your radio unit during transmission attempts. Standard procedure. We analyze all failed communications for training purposes." Briggs stared at the tape. He had forgotten about the automatic recording system built into the field radios. It ran continuously, capturing everything within range. "We had a technician review it," the captain said. "He flagged several anomalies. I want you to listen." They went to a small room with a tape player. The captain threaded the reel and pressed play. Static filled the speakers. The same empty hiss Briggs remembered from the mountain. Then, faintly, beneath it, something else emerged. A rhythm. 3 short pulses. Pause. 1 long pulse. Over and over. "That's the pattern you noted in your log," the captain said. "Morse code for the letter V. But listen to what comes after." He fast-forwarded the tape. The static changed, growing deeper, more resonant. Then a new sound appeared. A low vibration. Barely audible, rising and falling like breath. "That's not interference," the captain said. "That's a voice." Briggs felt cold. "I don't hear words." Neither did we, at first. The captain adjusted the speed, slowing the playback to half. The vibration stretched out, deepened, and suddenly Briggs could hear it. A single word, distorted and hollow. "Down." The same word they had heard on the radio at the clearing. But this recording was from earlier, from the first night at the station, when they had thought they were alone. "There's more," the captain said. He fast-forwarded again, stopping at a section marked with red grease pencil. "This was recorded at 0247 hours. That's the night your man Carter went missing temporarily." He pressed play. For several seconds, there was only the hum. Then suddenly a different sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching over gravel. They grew louder, closer to the microphone. Then a voice, clear and close. "Ellis." It was Carter's name, spoken softly, almost gently. But the voice wasn't Briggs, it wasn't Tate's, it was something else. Something that sounded human but wasn't quite right. The cadence was off, the tone too flat. Briggs felt his hands grip the edge of the table. That's not one of us. No, it's not. The footsteps on the tape moved away, fading back into static. Then, faintly, another sound. A second set of footsteps. Smaller, hurried. Carter following. He was sleepwalking, Briggs said. He didn't know what he was doing. Maybe, the captain said. Or maybe he was being called. He stopped the tape and looked at Briggs. We're sending another team to the station. Full equipment, environmental survey, soil samples. They'll be up there for a week. I want you to brief them before they leave. Sir, with respect, I don't think anyone should go back up there. Noted, but the decision's made. The station's too valuable to abandon. We need to know what's causing these anomalies. He paused. One more thing. Did you or your men see anything physical, structures, markings, anything that might explain a human presence? Briggs thought about the crack in the ridge, the narrow fissure leading into darkness. He thought about the blue light Carter described. He almost mentioned it. Then he stopped. If he told them, they would investigate. They would go inside. And something told him that would be a mistake. No, sir, Briggs said. Just rock and fog. The captain studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right. Dismissed. Briggs left the office and walked to the barracks. His hands were shaking. He found Tate in the common room reading a newspaper. They played me the tapes, Briggs said quietly. Tate looked up and Briggs met. There was a voice calling Carter's name. Tate folded the newspaper slowly. Who was it? I don't know, but it wasn't us. Tate was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I saw something that night when we were looking for Carter. What did you see? A shape on the ridge above us, tall, thin, standing against the sky. It was only there for a second. Then the fog covered it. I thought it was a tree. But trees don't move. Briggs sat down. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wasn't sure. And because if I was sure, I'd have to accept what it meant. Tate leaned forward. Something lives up there in the mountain. And it's been there a long time. 2 weeks later, the second team deployed to Mount Shasta. 6 men led by a lieutenant named Marcus Novak. They carried twice the equipment Briggs' team had: beef generators, floodlights, seismic sensors, and a portable weather station. Command wanted data, hard numbers, explanations. They radioed in every 6 hours for the first 2 days.
The reports were routine: station secure, equipment operational, weather clear. On the third day, they reported hearing the hum. Novak described it as pervasive and disorienting, but not dangerous. On the fourth day, the radio schedule was missed. Command waited 2 hours, then tried to establish contact. No response. They tried again at the next scheduled check-in. Still nothing. A search and rescue team was dispatched immediately. They reached the station the following morning. The camp was intact. Tents stood upright. Gear neatly stacked. Food supplies untouched. The radio was on, tuned to the correct frequency, power indicator glowing green. The logbook lay open on the workbench. The last entry written in Novak's hand read, Day 4, 14:30 hours. Hum increasing in intensity. Crew reports headaches, disorientation. Carter's journal entries prove accurate. Recommend immediate evacuation. That was all. No signature, no follow-up. The 6 men were gone. The rescue team searched for 3 days, covering every trail, every slope, every gully within 5 miles. They found nothing. No tracks, no clothing, no equipment. It was as if the men had simply vanished. One searcher, a sergeant named Paul Diaz, reported finding something unusual near the ridge. A section of ground, roughly circular, where the soil was darker, almost black, as if scorched. The area was approximately 12 feet in diameter. At the center was a depression, shallow but distinct, shaped like a footprint, but it was too large, nearly 3 feet long, with only 4 toes. Diaz took photographs. The images were logged into evidence and then weeks later went missing from the file. The official report classified the incident as a training accident with multiple casualties due to environmental exposure and terrain hazards. The bodies were listed as unrecovered. The families were notified. The case was closed. But inside the Army Signal Corps, the station became known as the Silent Ridge. Informal orders were passed down. No teams after September, no solo operations, no overnight stays. The station was monitored remotely when possible, and when repairs were necessary, they were done quickly, during daylight, and never near the ridge. Briggs received a copy of the incident report in early November. He read it alone in his quarters, feeling the weight of each word. 6 men gone, just like Carter had almost been. He thought about the voice on the tape, the footsteps, the shape Tate had seen on the ridge. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small notebook. It wasn't the official logbook from the mission. It was his personal journal, the one he kept for himself. He turned to a blank page and wrote, "They weren't taken, they were invited, and they accepted." He closed the notebook and locked it in the drawer. That night he dreamed of the mountain. He was standing at the relay station, alone, in the dark. The hum filled the air, so deep it shook his bones. In front of him, the crack in the ridge glowed with pale blue light. A figure stood at the entrance, tall and thin, wrapped in shadow. It raised one hand, beckoning. Briggs tried to turn away, but his legs wouldn't move. The figure stepped closer. It had no face, only darkness where features should be. It leaned down close to his ear and whispered in a voice like wind through stone, "Come back." Briggs woke gasping, his heart pounding. His room was dark and silent. He checked his watch. 02:47 hours, the same time Carter had left the tent on the mountain. He got up and walked to the window. Outside, the base was quiet, lights glowing faintly in the distance. Everything looked normal, safe. But he knew better. Somewhere in California, on a mountain wrapped in fog and silence, something was waiting. It had waited for a long time, patient and still. It had called to men before, and it would call again. And one day, someone would answer. Briggs returned to his bed but didn't sleep. He lay awake until dawn, listening to the silence, feeling the pressure in his chest that never quite went away. The mountain had marked him. He knew that now. He could feel it faint and distant, like a thread pulling at the edge of his mind. He never went back to Mount Shasta, but part of him never left. 23 years later, in 1992, a researcher named Dr. Ellen Marks was reviewing declassified Army signal records at the National Archives in Maryland. She was writing a paper on Cold War-era signal intelligence operations and had requested files related to remote relay stations in the western United States. Most of the files were routine maintenance logs, equipment inventories, personnel rosters. But one file caught her attention. Mount Shasta Relay Station, 1969. Status: decommissioned. Reason: environmental anomaly. She opened the file. Inside were 3 documents. 1. Lieutenant Walter Briggs' mission report. 2. A follow-up inspection report from October 1969. 3. A handwritten note, unsigned, dated November 1969. The note read, "Do not send personnel to this site after dark. Do not investigate the ridge above the station. If H is reported, evacuate immediately. This is not a recommendation, this is an order." Dr. Marks photocopied the file and began her research. She drove to California and visited Weed. The gas station was still there, though under new management. She spoke to older residents who remembered the mountain and the stories. One woman in her 70s told her about a Forest Service ranger who had gone missing near the relay station in 1971. His name was David Holloway. He was experienced, careful. He radioed in one evening and said he was investigating strange sounds near the ridge. That was the last anyone heard from him. They found his truck 2 weeks later, parked at the trailhead, keys in the ignition. His pack was inside, untouched. His radio was on, tuned to an empty frequency. They never found him. Dr. Marks hiked to the relay station herself. It took her 2 days. The trail was overgrown, the markers faded. When she reached the shelf, the station was gone. Only the concrete foundation remained, cracked and weathered. The antenna tower had been dismantled, but the ridge was still there. She stood at the edge and looked up. The crack was easy to find once you knew where to look. A narrow fissure in the rock, dark and deep. She didn't go near it. As the sun set, she felt the pressure in her ears, faint at first, then stronger. The hum began, low and steady, vibrating in her chest. She left before full dark. Dr. Marks published her paper in 1993. It was titled Infrasound Phenomenon and Environmental Disorientation in Remote Military Installations. The paper mentioned Mount Shasta briefly, citing it as a case study in how low-frequency sound could affect human perception, but she kept the handwritten note to herself. Years later, in 2004, another incident occurred. A group of hikers reported hearing strange sounds near the ridge. They described a deep hum and said they felt compelled to climb higher. One of them, a man named Thomas Ryland, separated from the group and was found the next morning sitting on a rock near the old station site, staring at the mountain. He wouldn't speak for 3 days. When he finally did, he said he had seen a light inside the crack. Blue, he said, like someone holding a lantern. The Forest Service closed the area permanently. The official reason was geological instability. The real reason stayed buried in files marked restricted access. Lieutenant Walter Briggs died in 2001. He was 71. His obituary mentioned his service in the Army Signal Corps and his work in communications. It did not mention Mount Shasta. Sergeant Henry Tate retired in 1982 and moved to Oregon. He rarely spoke about his time in the service. When asked, he only said that some mountains were best left alone. Private Ellis Carter left the Army in 1970 after a medical discharge.
The reason listed was psychological stress related to environmental exposure. He moved back to his hometown in Ohio and lived quietly for many years. In 2006, a reporter named Linda Carver tracked him down for an article on military veterans. She asked him about his service. He was polite but brief. Near the end of the interview, she mentioned Mount Shasta. Carter's face went pale. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. "I went inside," he said quietly. "Inside what?" Carver asked. "The mountain. Went in my dreams every night for 30 years. He turned to face her. "They're still there, waiting." "Who?" Carter didn't answer. He asked her to leave. Carver published the article without the exchange. She didn't think anyone would believe it, but she kept her notes. In 2018, a team of geologists surveyed Mount Shasta for volcanic activity. Their instruments detected unusual seismic patterns near the ridge, low-frequency vibrations consistent with infrasound. The source was unclear. One geologist, Dr. Sarah Brennan, noted in her field report, "Observed optical distortion near upper ridge at 1900 hours. Appears consistent with heat shimmer, but ambient temperature does not support this. Further investigation recommended." No further investigation was conducted. The mountain still stands. The ridge is still closed. The crack is still there, narrow and dark, leading down into stone. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind is still and the valley is quiet,
People in Weed report hearing something from the mountain. A hum, low and steady, felt more than heard. They close their windows and turn up their radios. They don't talk about it, but they know the mountain is listening. And somewhere deep inside, something is listening back. In 2019, a small box arrived at the Army Heritage and Education Centers in Pennsylvania. It had been mailed anonymously from Ohio. Inside was a handwritten note. "This belonged to my father. He wanted it preserved." No explanation needed. The box contained Private Ellis Carter's journal from 1969. The archivist cataloged it and placed it in storage. Years later, a graduate student researching Cold War-era military psychology requested access to materials related to environmental stress. The journal was among the files provided. She read it over the course of 3 days. Most of the entries were routine: dates, weather, tasks. But the entries from late September were different. The handwriting grew tighter, more erratic. The words became fragmented. The final entry, dated September 24th, 1969, filled an entire page. It read, "I went back. I didn't mean to. I woke up and I was walking. My boots were on. My flashlight was in my hand. I was halfway up the ridge before I realized I wasn't dreaming." The hum was louder. It pulled me. Not sound, something else. Like a hand on my chest, guiding. I reached the crack. I stood at the edge and looked in. The walls were smooth, black, like glass. I could see light deeper inside. Blue, steady, like a flame that doesn't flicker. I wanted to go in. I wanted to see what was there. But then I heard a voice. Not from the crack. From behind me. It said my name. I turned around and saw the lieutenant. He was standing there looking at me. He didn't say anything else. He just waited. I walked back down. But I know they're still there inside, waiting. They didn't speak with words. They spoke with the hum. And I heard them. They said, "Stay. Listen. Come back." I won't. But I think about it every night. The graduate student made a copy of the entry and filed her report. The journal was returned to storage. She never mentioned it in her thesis. But sometimes, when she was alone in her apartment late at night, she would take out the copy and read it again, and she would wonder if, somewhere on a mountain in California, something was still waiting, still humming, still listening for someone who wouldn't turn around. Mount Shasta remains an active volcanic peak. The Forest Service continues to monitor the area for seismic activity.